Welcome back again to another session of Whiskey Diaries. I'm your host, Macallan. We're here at Death and Taxes in the middle of quarantine with the coronavirus taking a big toll around the world. It's been pretty stressful time for us. We're not allowed to open, but I thought that we thought that giving a little bit of whiskey and trying a little bit of whiskey will improve the mood a little bit. So today what we're going to do is we are going to talk about world whiskies. So we're going to pick 5 countries around the world and we're going to talk a little bit about what makes them special, what makes them different, flavor profiles and so on and so on. We're not going to go into massive details about them. This is just to give you a general idea on what each whiskey does and what they do differently. The first one that we're going to try is the American whiskey. American whiskey being, I reckon, the most distinct out of the whole world. I reckon that if you put a blind tasting an American bourbon or a bourbon whiskey compared to any Scotch or any single malt out there, you'll be able to pick it from a mile away. The reason is corn. Corn produces a very sweet whiskey, and America only allows you to put the bourbon label if it's made for at least 51% corn. There has another 6 to 7 rules that we're not going to go delve too much into it, but basically makes American whiskey quite rigid. Like, they can explore with rye and they have explored with different finishing touches and all that stuff, but essentially if you want to put bourbon on the bottle, there's so many rules that you have to follow that basically they all taste very similar. So Eagle Rare is one of my favorites as well. Again, has to be aged for a minimum of 4 years, sorry. And it has to be aged in brand American new oak. So the new oak, and it's charged barrels as well. So that charredness from the American oak creates a really sweet, really strong flavor whiskey. So that's bourbon from America. The second one that we're going to try is going to be Irish. Irish whiskey is very different to Scottish whiskey in regards that it's most of the times it's triple distill. Scottish whiskey is double distill. Now Irish whiskey started to produce a lot more of double distilled whiskies, but traditionally speaking Redbreast or Irish whiskey in itself, they distill it for 3 times. This creates a little bit of a lighter whiskey, producing similar to more like a light Highland style of whiskey. Redbreast is one of my favorite. It actually tastes like maple syrup almost. They create a really good whiskey. This is a 12-year-old, and that's basically the main difference that you want to find in Irish whiskies. The third one that we're going to go into Australian whiskey. Australian whiskey follows Scottish whiskey in production. It's a double distilled whiskey. The main difference that you find in Australian whiskey is that it's produced with something that is called brewer's barley. Brewer's barley is a barley that it was mainly produced to produce beer, to create beer. The barley that is used for most Scottish whiskey and all that stuff is another type of barley that is dedicated for Scottish whiskey production. The reason why the beer barley is different than the normal barley that is used is because of the yield, the alcohol yield that it creates. Now it also has a very particular flavor aftertaste, and that's what you get from Australian whiskey, and most Australian whiskies uses this type of barley, and you can taste it if you compare like a single malt from Scotland to a single malt from Australia. You will find that there's a particular aftertaste that is very unique to Australian whiskey. So that's the Lark. It's one of the original whiskey distilleries in Tasmania. The weather climate in Tasmania is very similar to Scotland. They have so it produces the aging and all that stuff is very similar in that regard. That's the Lark. Then we're going to go to Taiwan. So Kavalan started making whiskey in 2010. They produce it. The first one, and 2008, my bad. And it got received with a lot of skepticism. Obviously, coming from Taiwan, people didn't really think that they can produce a really good whiskey, but since then they have won countless awards, including best whiskey in the world. I think it was 2015. And they experiment with a lot of different barrels. This one is actually just an ex-bourbon cask, but they've been using Fino sherry, they're using like wine wine barrels, all sorts of barrels are actually really, really tasty. And the main thing that they have compared to other whiskies is the fact that because the weather is so hot there, the aging process is a lot quicker. Obviously, temperature affects the way whiskey gets aged. So yeah, this one, like most of them are not even more than 5 years old, and they come with a rich color. All of them are bottled at like over 50%, especially the Solist versions. They do have a standard bottle that is just a normal Kavalan, that is just basically just the entry-level whiskey, but some of them are really incredible whiskies. So that's the Taiwanese whiskey. Now we're going to go to Japanese whiskey. Japanese whiskey, we've done a couple of sessions on this one. They produce basically a carbon copy of Scottish whiskey. They both of the master distillers that created Nikka and Yamazaki back in the 1900s were taught and learned how to distill in Scotland directly. So they try to copy every single aspect in the production of whiskey. So they produce a very similar flavor profile than the single malt counterpart. So the main thing about that you want to look in Japanese whiskey is the fact that it's very light in flavor. They produce, they found that like smoky whiskeys or something like Arla, Lafroig and all of, they found too aggressive, too upfront. So they produce a whiskey that is a lot lighter, a lot easier drinking. It's still very complex, but just really soft and really perfectly distilled. So that's Yoichi from Japan. That's what you're looking for. And then finally, we're going to Macallan. This is a classic single malt from Scotland. Scottish whiskey that we can go for hours talking about the different categories and everything from Scotland. They have already 6 different regions that we can do, and all of them they produce a very distinct type of whiskey. So this one in particular is from the Highlands, basically Speyside. It's the Macallan. It's actually maybe like 4 or 5 kilometers away from Glenfiddich. That is basically Speyside, so it's a very blur line, but they call themselves a Highland single malt. Macallan produces more of the whiskies, like almost 100% sherry cask. They are very proud of producing one of the greatest sherry cask whiskies in the world, and it's a 12-year-old. This one in particular is a double cask, so bourbon and sherry casks, but they're very famous for the 100% sherry bombs. It's a great whiskey, and they produce some excellent duty-free as well, retail as well. So that's basically it for today. All these whiskies, they share a very similar backbone in the way they produce, with double distillation and triple distillation, but the flavor comes from the raw material that they use and how they distill it later on. So yeah, that's our 6 whiskies for today. Salam Jabba.